Hello and welcome to this week's episode where I'm joined by Kat Medina, the author of The Joys of Jetlag, which I'm currently reading at the minute. So we're going to discuss that book and some interesting topics in there, such as using your travel experiences in your real life, if you like, in your day-to-day life. So we're going to talk about that because I'm very bad at that. And Kat has traveled to over 35 countries and lived in Ecuador, Argentina, France, and Spain. So a lot of questions, a lot of travel discussion today. Kat, welcome to the show. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. Thanks so much for having me on.
That's a pleasure. Can you tell the listeners where you are right now?
I'm in California in South Lake Tahoe, so right in the mountains next to a big, beautiful lake.
Sounds pretty idyllic. Can you explain to my European listeners and viewers, if they're watching, if whereabouts in California that is? Because obviously it's a big state. It covers an amazing array of different types of weather from north to south. So whereabouts are you?
Kind of northeastern, by Sacramento, and just on the border of Nevada. So Nevada is about a 15-minute drive from my house.
Oh yeah, I think people would know that. Okay, that's cool. I went to California last year on a road trip, and we got stuck because there's a wildfire. So we had to go to Acaxia. Is that how you pronounce it? It's right by Crescent City. Do you know that
Okay.
far north up there?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so that's where we kind of not got stuck, but we were planning to go down south and work our way back up the 101, right? But we kind of had to go through I guess, the middle of that road in Northern California. But amazing area, lovely area.
It is. Yeah, it's unfortunate there's so many wildfires by it, though.
Yeah, we have the same thing here. Yeah, it's just a constant daily, yeah, I guess daily battle in the summer, I suppose. Yeah,
Yeah, it seems
yeah,
like wildfire season's now extending to more and more of the year.
yeah. That's pretty grim, isn't it? Yeah. Okay, I'd like to go back to the backstory of our guests and kind of understand where travel came into your life. So, can you explain where you grew up and was travel part of your growing up as well?
I am originally from Santa Rosa, California, which is the North Bay. It's about an hour and a half north of San Francisco. And from a very young age, I was always interested in traveling. I kind of, as a young girl, daydreamt about exploring the world instead of, meeting Prince Charming and getting married. My dream career as a kid was to be an explorer, MacGyver type person, which I don't really know if that's a career. It,
Why
it
not?
yeah, piques my interest in adventure and experiencing new cultures. And I had gone on a couple of trips as a kid, but what really kicked off my wanderlust was studying abroad in France when I was 17. I went for 6 months and didn't know a soul, hardly knew any French. I could barely say my name, like where I was from or what my name is. I just knew how to like count to 10 and sing songs because the public education that I got for French wasn't fantastic. But it forced me so far outside of my comfort zone. And just it kickstarted this shift in me where I just really enjoyed my own company. Like in the beginning, before
No.
you make friends, especially when you can't talk to a lot of people and
Mm.
express yourself and you're stuck with like gestures, you can't, it's hard to cultivate friendships at that base. And so I really had to kind of lean in and trust in myself and enjoy my own company for a while and just prove to me like how exhilarating it is to do incredibly hard things and come out through the other side. And then as like growing up, I moved a ton. I moved almost 20 times before I even graduated high school.
Oh wow.
So I think maybe it was a bit of nature and nurture of just kind of having this restless spirit of always wanting to go to the next place and experience new things.
But 17 is young, isn't it? If you look back, that is
It
so
is,
young, isn't
yeah.
it?
Lots
Yeah.
of the travels I've been on and things that I've done, like in the moment, it just feels like, yes, this makes sense. This is exactly what I should be doing. And then when I look back, I'm like, I can't believe I did that.
Yeah, but they kind of get the nostalgia going, don't they, a little bit, because
Yeah.
you kind of hark back to those days because it's so fresh and new. And I'm not saying like post travels after that is not the same, but there is an element of truth to that. Like culture shock could be an example where when you land somewhere for the first time and it is genuine culture shock, you kind of remember that because it hits you, right? But then
Hmm.
things do get easier after that because you experience that one first dose of culture shock, unless you're going somewhere really abnormal. But yeah, going to France at 17, I think a lot of Americans come on the podcast and they say they do their university swap.
Hmm.
Wasn't really a thing in the UK. I don't really remember That's definitely not an option at my university. I don't really remember too many people taking that as an option. But then in those days, you could just go to EU and work anywhere. So
Mhm.
I don't think it would be as such a bigger thing. But I get the impression that Americans kind of take that opportunity like with both hands, really, at university.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And I think like, so I was still in high school when I did that one, but then I also went in university to Spain. But one of the things that really shocked me when I was in France is I attended a French high school and it was eye-opening because I heard a completely different version of world history.
Oh,
And it was
yeah,
one in which the United States wasn't the protagonist, but France was.
yeah,
And I think seeing how everyone has their own version of history and reality based on where they live, it was fascinating because I learned about things that I had no clue they happened, but they definitely involved the US. And so it was kind of a humbling experience of seeing that. And, history affects culture, but also just a great way to learn that there's so many different ways to live life. And just because I'm used to one way doesn't mean it's the right way.
yeah, absolutely. I think we'll come to that as one of the lessons of travel later on. How did you find the French opinion on Americans? What was that like? Did you get a sense of what they were generally thinking? You want to generalize too much, but like the general consensus.
Yeah, so it was 2003 when I went,
Okay.
which was during the time of the Iraq War and
Yep.
America, wasn't looking so hot in the eyes of others. It was the time of like, Americans were calling French fries freedom fries. And so there was a lot of divisiveness. And I, I mean, my experience was pretty great. Like
Mm.
I met some really kind people, and I know that there's like the French stereotype that they aren't the nicest, but I had the opposite experience. Like once I really, maybe it was because I was like plopped into a family, into a high school, although did notice a difference with like some of the other exchange students. They were from all over the world with the program that I participated in. And there were a couple of Americans. One was from Idaho and the other was from like Kansas or
Oh,
Kentucky or something.
in the middle.
Yeah, and so we'd meet people and they'd be like, "Where are you from?" And they'd say their states and they'd be like, "Oh, American." And I'd be like, "I'm American. I'm from California." And they'd be like, "Do you know Brad Pitt?" So I had an advantage with my state. It wasn't very
Sure.
fair, but I went with it. And so my experience was that they were very kind and interested and curious, and their perception of California was that we went to school in our swimsuits and everyone was a cheerleader and we'd pass celebrities all the time. But I lived in Northern California, so the beaches are much cooler there.
Yeah, absolutely. And what about Spain? Fast forward a few years, what was the reaction like there? Because obviously, slightly different history there, an interesting history between America and Spain. If you look at
Yeah.
the continent of America and North America and how it's all kind of been divided out, like how was that?
So I had studied abroad in Barcelona for a year, and it was my sophomore year, so my second year of university. And I went there in hopes to learn Spanish, but I found it to be pretty challenging because it is such a big touristy city. And
Mm,
also like the main language is Catalan more
Catalan.
so than
Yeah.
Spanish. And I noticed that like, trying to learn a language where you realize so many of the things that kind of fill the space like signage and stuff like that. Like it all plays a part in language learning. So we went to Madrid for a weekend and all of the signs were in Spanish. And I was like, oh, I'm learning so much without even trying. But my experience in Barcelona was like everyone was eager to speak English with me.
Okay.
And it was a little bit tougher to make friends there because I felt like maybe it was the time that I went, in university, everyone already has their groups of friends. And so that was a bit more challenging. But overall, I found, gosh, in pretty much every place that I've been, it just feels like when you're traveling and when you're kind of going about it, like open and curious and eager to learn about the other culture, the other people, who they are, um, you're generally treated with kindness for the most.
Mm.
And so another great experience, really.
Yeah, Barcelona is interesting, isn't it? Because it's quite rare to go to a country where you have such a strong, I would say independence movement, but a strong culture within a country, right? Because when I
Mhm.
went to Barcelona, it's like Catalan flags everywhere. We all know
Yeah.
Barcelona, the football team. They speak different language, like you say. It's quite an interesting place to be. And you can speak Spanish there, but obviously they're not speaking Spanish amongst themselves. It's like quite a
Mhm.
strong, I don't know what the word is. It's like opinion, isn't there? No, we're going to speak Catalan.
Yeah,
I
like
guess I'll speak Spanish, yeah, to like tourists maybe, but like there's a pride in their own culture and language. It's quite strange within a country when you almost feel like, I don't want to get in trouble for this. You almost feel like it should be their own little country, right? Because
yeah.
they have such a distinctive culture and language and food and the rest of it.
Yeah. And I met a couple people from there who thought that. So
Mm.
it's very interesting.
Yeah, yeah, very interesting. Did you manage to travel much of Europe when you're based in Spain? I guess France, were you too young, or were you out into Europe as well?
When I was in France, it was mostly like I lived with a host family, so it was just kind of like doing what they typically did. And while I was with them, we did one trip to the Alps in Italy, but mostly we just stayed in the town that I was living in, which was
Okay.
really cool still.
Yeah.
And when I was in Barcelona, I took full advantage of how close and easy it was to travel across borders
Yeah.
with Ryanair or trains, and
Yeah.
just tried to go as often as I could because, where I'm from, the United States is so big and we're not close to many countries, and it's very expensive to get to other countries. And so I just took full advantage.
Yeah, I don't blame you because I kind of feel that pain in Vancouver, right? The,
Yeah.
the, the only place I think in terms of flights I find is cheap in quotation marks is the West Coast where you are. You can get cheap flights down to LA, San Fran, and Portland. Seattle's pretty close as well. But
Yeah.
like going anywhere else, so it is a mission in terms of time, but also the cost does get to you after a while. And I kind of miss Europe for that, I think, a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely.
For Europe, when you're traveling around, was there any highlights in that Spain year that you're there where you visited? Thought, oh wow, like maybe you didn't expect anything? Because I know you probably read about Portugal or Spain or England, right? But did you go anywhere that was quite unique?
Yeah, I think I went with my roommate and another friend to Morocco, and
Oh right, okay, yeah,
I would say that was the one that really stood out as being different than anywhere I'd previously traveled. I hadn't done too much research. We took advantage of a last minute flight and just kind of scrambled it together. And we had a bit of culture shock with it. Went in through Tangier, and it was kind of intense within the first
mm,
couple hours where, and this is back in the day, so I don't know how it is now. So it's like 2003. And at the time, one of the challenges with like these port cities is, and a lot of bigger cities, is the challenge of fake guides,
yeah,
where people try to take you different places. And a lot of times the places they go, they have connections with, and they try to pressure you to get something there. And we read about that and we're mentally prepared for it to be like, no, thank you. Like, we don't need a guide. Thank you anyway. Just within 20 minutes of arriving, this one man was so persistent. And we like even went into these little shops to try to get him away from us. But what he did is he kept walking ahead of us and being like, come on, my friends, come on. And then turning
yeah,
back, and we're like, we're just walking in this general direction. Like, we're not following you. This is not a guide situation. And we kept changing, and he kept going in front of us. And it was very odd. And he kind of stuck with us the whole time. And we just needed to kill about 2 hours before we went on a train to a different city. And after about an hour and a half of this going on, when we're trying to explore the city, and he keeps like staying about 10 feet in front of us the whole time, pretending that he's our guide, we're like, okay, bye, we're leaving. And he started to demand money, even though he
yeah.
wasn't our guide. And um, we're like, we don't have any. Like, I held out coins, and he like slapped my hand, and the coins
Oh,
were flying, and started screaming at us. And a different guy, like a different local guy, came up, and like he had seen what was happening towards the tail end of it and started getting in an argument with the fake guide. in Arabic, and we didn't really understand what was going on.
Mm.
But the guy that intervened was kind of like, you guys just get to the train station, don't talk to anyone, don't leave the train station, and go right now.
Oh,
And so we started kind of running to the train station, and they got into like a fist fight.
oh, they did.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
And that was our welcome to the country, kind of.
Oh,
And
wow. Huh.
we were very shocked and kind of unsettled, but so grateful for the stranger to step in and help us when he saw what was happening.
Yeah, I didn't expect that. I thought he'd like come in and just kind of calm it down, understand the situation, and that'd be it. But the fact they got into a fight is a bit extreme, isn't it?
Yes, I think it is a very unusual and rare situation. I think we just got some random guy just trying to cling on to us, and we were very clear this is not
Mm.
a guide situation. But the stranger helped us out, and then once we went on the train and got to a city, like we went to Marrakesh next, and then Fez, and then Chefchaouen, which is smaller, and this is pre Instagram, you know, like blowing up in popularity.
Mm.
So it was still very, very quiet, and it felt kind of off the beaten path in that year. We just, after we got out of that port city and that initial experience, everyone was very hospitable and welcoming. And it was just, it was like a polar opposite from the initial introduction. So that trip was maybe like a week or 10 days long. And it was really eye-opening too, just seeing how different people lived. We happened to travel during Ramadan, and so that made it
Mm.
a bit interesting trying to figure out, where to eat. Generally, like back in the day before like, TripAdvisor or other websites where you can figure out what the most delicious restaurant is, you just kind of went where there were a lot of people eating. But during Ramadan, no one's really eating during the
Yeah.
day. So it was a guessing game. And at one point it was, yeah, like stomach roulette. And we did lose out one of the times.
Yeah, we experienced the Ramadan travel last year, and I think we were in Jordan and yeah, maybe Oman as well. But it's quite interesting because we found that they kind of do help you eat, but like very secretively. So what happens is like around the corner from our hostel, the local cafe we always went to for a drink did seem to serve that, and that was fine. But any food is obviously out of the question.
Mhm.
But then he did say, "Oh, I have got some soup and stuff. But if you're going to eat it, that's absolutely fine. But I need to pull down the blinds, almost like to put you in the corner and hide you away."
Mhm.
Um, so it was possible, but it was tough because even Jordan, which is a tourist destination, if you like, even that in Amman, the capital, was pretty tough to find. Not hard to find iftar meals in the evening. There's plenty of options for that, but during the day was interesting. I think the only advice I could probably give people is like hotels. They
Mhm.
seem to have food on site for tourism purposes, where maybe they're owned by non-Muslims. Maybe I'm not sure.
Mhm.
So that's like an option. But yeah, it's an interesting time.
I'm
That
curious if
yeah.
if you had a similar experience. Like one thing that really shocked us was once it was the time that they could eat, if we happened to be walking like down a street where there's like little stalls or shops, they would invite us in and offer us food before they even had a chance to eat themselves.
Oh wow.
And I was just shocked because that would not happen where I was from.
No, same.
Absolutely not.
No,
I
we
don't know
we,
if you
we had
if
a we kind
fun.
of had a rule because if we're in a restaurant where it's obviously clearly for the iftar meal in the evening, we actually let people go first
Mhm.
because they'll be so kind to let you join the queue and go in front. But like, no, 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 you haven't eaten all day.
Yeah.
We kind of have. We just let the locals queue up first, and then we'll go afterwards. That's kind of maybe the what you should do as a tourist. But getting invited in, no, not really. I think we had that sort of invite maybe in like the desert, like Wadi Rum. They would like create that sort of vibe, even though it's Ramadan, like
Yeah.
coming in like it's almost like a family vibe, but not really on the street.
Hmm.
I didn't get much of that, but that's amazing there, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah. I was shocked. We like generally just politely declined because it was just
Sure.
like, this is just, sometimes someone offers something that just feels so nice, like you can't accept it.
Yes, or you're unfortunately a bit suspicious
Yeah. Yeah.
because what you said about earlier about the constant, the fake guys and the constant harassment. Something like Delhi's a bit It's a bit like that. If you go in the center of Delhi, you just don't get left alone. And
Yeah.
even if you want to go somewhere, just like a rickshaw or a tuk-tuk to somewhere else, they will try and take you to a restaurant or a shop, and you do have to make that clear, like no restaurant, no shop.
Yeah.
And they get annoyed because travelers then use Uber, but at least Uber, you get the price, which is guaranteed, and it's normal, and you don't get taken to any rogue restaurants or shops, right? So I can see
Yeah.
why travelers do that.
Yeah, I agree. I had a similar experience in Delhi, actually.
Oh yeah, okay. Yeah, interesting place. That is, in terms of culture shock, that was my second one. My first one was Bangkok. I was like, wow, what is this? Never been to Asia.
Hmm.
And you think you get used to that. Vietnam's very busy, but Delhi was like, whoa, that is a different level.
Yeah, I agree completely. It was like every sense that I had
Yeah,
was so overstimulated, like sight, sound, smell, taste, like everything. And it was unlike anything I'd ever experienced.
yeah, hardcore. I think if you're going to India, you probably are going to land in Delhi, aren't you? So I would advise people giving it a go. But the dust, the smell, the smog in the evening, where it's just like that constant, like glazy, hazy. Don't know, really like that sort of level of cloud underneath the sun. You don't really see the sun properly.
Yeah,
Um, and just the food obviously is incredible, but you need to have a strong stomach for that.
Wally Belly.
Yeah, got that a few times. God, so ill. Okay, and before we get to your book, I want to ask, how did you, obviously you're traveling when you're younger in high school, but also university. How did you then develop maybe thinking of, oh, do you know what, I want to travel alongside a career? Like, how did you bring those two together, or were they completely separate of all times?
Initially, it was separate. I studied international business and then graduated during the recession. And so it was tough to get a job. And I got one at a solar company doing marketing. And the after like a year, the business went under. And so I started waitressing, which is what I had done in college. And during that time, I was chatting with my then boyfriend, now husband, and two other friends. And we were like, we were all kind of recent graduates and just lamenting about how different we expected it to be once we graduated and
Hmm.
how challenging it was to get a job and a career. And we're like, we should just start our own business. So we ended up starting a web design business, and my husband had studied like design and development, and the other two friends hadn't, but we all learned it using like free online resources.
Yeah.
And so we created that business, and the beautiful thing about it is it could all be done remotely. And because we were working for ourselves, we had this priority to make sure that the time that we were working was efficiency based, like put in the time, get a project done. You don't have to clock in and out 9 to 5 just to stretch out the clock. It doesn't matter when you do it as long as it's done and done well.
Hmm.
And that meant that I could do it anywhere. And so I quit the waitressing job, and for the as long as I can remember, I've always wanted to travel to South America. It's just always, I
Yeah.
feel like everyone has a certain spot that they're drawn to.
Yeah.
And maybe it's a country. For me, it was a continent, but I was thinking like, gosh, I really want to do this. Like, I want to just experience it and learn Spanish and just finally go on this adventure when I don't have a lot of things really that I need to be, at home for. Like, I didn't have a mortgage, I didn't have kids, I wasn't married yet, but or a job that
Hmm.
had going in every single day. And so I decided to go to Ecuador and then to Argentina. And I have happened to have like the most encouraging and supportive then boyfriend, now husband, who knew from the start, like this is what really, really lights me up. And so we did the long distance thing while I was there. And it just, when I was there, I was able to still do the web design business. And so in a sense, I kind of used my degree, international business, just combining the two interests. But web design was never really my passion. It was more just a means to an end. It made it so that I was able to have the lifestyle that I wanted. And it wasn't until I think 2018 or 2019 when I finally took the leap and pursued a writing career, which is what I had kind of always wanted to do, but never really fully admitted it until then. Both of those jobs, it's lucky because you can do it anywhere. So that's made it really wonderful to be able to pair the two passions.
So you're like one of the early sort of pioneers of digital nomad, and like you literally are going out needing internet on the laptop, I guess, to work. But you kind of hear that recently, right? Maybe last 5 years, maybe because of COVID as well. But like that's a thing that's come in the last 5, 6, 7 years. But you were doing it like 5, 6, 7 years before that.
Yeah, it was, but it wasn't like the full-time thing. So I would
Right.
go longer trips and then come back. And I like, besides like the study abroad stuff,
Yeah.
the South America trip was just over 6 months.
Yeah.
And other than that, they've been like kind of capped at 3 to 4 weeks just because life has shifted a bit. But I still try to go as often as I can. But the people like nowadays that you see, I'm a bit envious, but also really respectful of the fact that they can pull off the full-time.
Yeah. I've had quite a few come on the podcast to talk about that. It's quite an interesting area and something I'd love to give a go at. But it is maybe not as glamorous, maybe sometimes people perceive on the internet or on social media. I think it's a few things got to weigh up, right? Especially yourself. You've got to know yourself, which we'll come to with your book. But I think that's great. You've got to go for 6 months. So that's a good amount of time to go for in terms of a trip. But even if you're going 3 or 4 weeks at a time to South America, you still got the choice to, right? I mean, how many people in America don't get that as a vacation time?
Yes, exactly. Yeah, most people they get like 2 weeks.
Yeah. But you've
And
given
like,
yourself the opportunity to go.
yeah,
Mm.
exactly. And I mean, a lot of people like they get like 2 to 3 weeks, but then almost have to kind of reserve it just in case something comes up and they don't have enough sick days, or
Sure.
so it's challenging. And then also the travel time to get places too.
Yeah, because South America is so far from here, isn't it? In terms of the flight time. I mean, it's crazy. I mean, it's 5 hours here to Mexico City. So you're
Yeah.
barely in Central America, really, before you get to like, I don't know, Buenos Aires or Rio, whatever. It's way down there. So it's a heck of a journey.
It is, yeah. And when I did that trip, I was just focused on budget. So
Yeah.
I think I had like 4 or 5 layovers, and it took almost 2 days to get there. And
Best
then
way.
it was long, but I was by myself, and it was like fine. And it's not like I had to rush back. I was like, I'm going for a couple months. It's okay. I can manage. But in the middle of it, it was pretty brutal. We went to Chile a year ago, 2 years ago. It was my husband and my 2-year-old son at the time. And with that one, we tried for as few layovers as possible because
Sure.
toddler travel you don't want to do a lot of layovers.
Can imagine. I think my rule for layover is on the way there, it's fine because you have the anticipation and the excitement. But on the way back, if I can, as short as possible, you just want to get
Yeah,
it over and done with.
that's a good rule. I like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. Okay. I'm going to come back to Ecuador and Argentina in a bit because I've got some questions. But I want to dive into your book, The Joys of Jetlag. Can you tell the listeners the premise of your book and why you wrote it?
Yeah. So kind of like what we were talking about, you can think of it. So it's called The Joys of Jetlag, how to use a traveler's mindset to not be an a-hole in daily life. And it acts kind of like a guidebook for how to use this traveler's mindset to experience more joy in daily life. Because most of us only get, in the US anyway, a few weeks, couple weeks of vacation each year. When we go on these trips, these vacations, we all know that feeling when we get there. It's like the stress and the worries just melt away, and we're quicker to laugh and more spontaneous and able to see setbacks as part of the adventure. And so I kind of wrote this as a way to teach readers how to seek out moments of awe and fulfillment, regardless of whether they're standing in line at a Trader Joe's or, watching the sunrise over the mountains of Nepal or wherever they choose to vacation, just to bridge the gap between, when we feel like we're at ease and at peace and enjoying our life on vacation versus the daily grind when we're in asshole autopilot mode. So the reason I wrote this is because for most of my life, I've been two different people. I traveled pretty extensively and then lived in 4 other countries. And I noticed that when I traveled, I was my best self and joy was effortless. But then when I returned home, it felt like it was elusive and forced. I'd try to control the uncontrollable. I'd get frustrated when things didn't go as planned, and I stopped appreciating the little things like clean drinking water or a hot shower, even though I knew firsthand from so many of the places that I'd been just how rare those things were, so many parts of the world. And so I'd focus on my next trip when I could feel fully alive again and being my best self, the person I was most proud of. And then one day I realized that as much as I prioritized traveling, I still spent most of my time at home. And it felt like such a waste to spend my days wishing I was somewhere else instead of enjoying where I was. So I made it my mission to bridge the gap between who I was when I traveled and who I was at home. And I realized that it all came down to this mindset, a traveler's mindset. And by embodying a traveler's mindset in daily life, when I wasn't traveling, I was able to feel the joy that I craved no matter where I was. And I kind of pinpointed the different characteristics that I naturally adopted as soon as my feet hit the tarmac and brought those home, because I knew that I could already do this because when I was abroad, it was effortless. So now I just had to figure out the details of what I was doing different and actively try to do it at home. And so did that for a while, and then COVID happened, so I really got to put it to the test.
Yeah, proper test.
And then I decided to write about it in hopes of providing people with simple but impactful strategies that they could use in their life to experience more joy and adventure on the day-to-day instead of just when they're on vacation.
Such an interesting topic. I've got so many points because I struggle with this big time. I'd even say I'm probably a bit like you, maybe like, I don't know, 2, 3, 4 years ago, where you're like this, because I am a polar opposite between local real life to travel. A few examples would be, when you travel, I don't know if this is natural or this is like normal, but I would be out all the time exploring all day, every day, easily getting 10, 15,000 steps in, exploring all different types of maybe hiking trails, cities, towns, nature, islands, whatever it is. I'm walking around. So I'm active, probably heart rate's going up because I'm more active, and I seem to be a bit happier. But in home life, I'm completely opposite. I'm lazy. I don't go out that much sometimes. It's completely opposite as one example, right? So I really struggle with this side of it because it feels like you are living two lives where if you're not away, you're probably thinking about it all the time, like I do most days. So therefore, you're not living in the present, are you? You're kind of like wishing you're somewhere else or doing something else, or at least just letting days go by. It's quite a strong feeling, but also a struggle.
Yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah. So this book was really interesting because you laid out your personal experiences with travel and life to the different topics of the chapters, right? So I like that because you're kind of giving an example of maybe your travel life and a story relating to that. But then that same type of feeling could be openness. I think it's one of them, the first one, into real life. You're like, oh, you're not like that. You are someone different. So it's like that's kind of straddling, trying to get that Kat travel self into Kat local self, on the ground day to day. So an awesome book. You start off with a Poon Hill adventure. I mean, what a trek that is in terms of Nepal. I think we hiked that. It's quite a tough hike, isn't it? And we got to the top and we couldn't believe our eyes how spectacular that was.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. Worth the hike for sure.
And the legs do get a bit of a scene too. Yeah. My next question is, so when you're traveling, were you thinking in your back of your mind, I need to write about this as like a travel vlog type thing? Or were you always thinking, maybe I need to do travels, come back home, sort yourself out in brackets there, and then maybe see how you do with that? And then that led on to the book. Like, how did that journey take place?
So before I left for that first trip to France at 17, my best friend gave me a journal like 2 days before I left. I'd never even thought to keep a journal. And it was right before I left, and it started this habit where since that trip, every single trip I've been on, I keep a journal and I write every day that I'm traveling. A lot of it's observations or just little interactions that happened, just things that I've noticed. And so that's the main focus when I'm traveling, is just filling out that journal. And then whatever comes of it down the line. But in writing the book, it was really, really helpful because I had just like this huge stack of journals of every place that I'd been to. And
Wow.
one thing I learned is like in the places that I lived for longer periods of time, because I was trying to learn the language, I would try to fill in the words as I learned them. So in France, like the beginning of it is like all English, but then it starts to slowly switch over to primarily French with a
Wow.
few English words.
Yeah.
I did the same thing when I was living in the Spanish-speaking countries. The downside is, since learning Spanish, I've completely forgotten
Got
French, so I
it.
can't
Okay. Yeah.
remember.
I thought that was coming. Yeah.
Yeah, some motivation to learn it eventually, because I don't know what I wrote.
That's
But
quite
I mean,
funny.
the
Yeah.
observations of a 17-year-old, like, I don't know. I can't imagine they're too profound.
It's a profound. Yeah. That's quite funny, but frustrating because you might have some like nice or interesting nuggets in there. I guess you can Google Translate it, I suppose.
Yeah, I could probably. It's
Yeah.
probably talking a lot about croissants and Nutella because I was obsessed.
Maybe that's volume 2 of the book,
Yeah,
or like a special edition at the end.
yeah, that's funny.
And you go to quite in depth subjects of your daily life as well. I think it's quite profound in that way, right? Because you talk through the scenarios relating to each of the chapters in your daily life, which are quite raw, I think, I must admit. When I'm reading, I think definitely about you trying to have a child, that's quite an interesting part
Mhm.
of the first chapter.
Yeah, I try, and that's one of those things that outside of traveling, I didn't really keep a journal, but then I
Mm-hmm.
started to, and it's much easier to do when I travel because you're seeing new things and it's feeling very exciting. But then at home, I tried to just, I took a little break after having kids because life got a little bit nuts, but to just do like 3 pages each morning and just it could be total crap, but just write and write and write. And so during that time, like my husband and I had been trying to have kids for a couple years and had a couple pregnancy losses. And I maintained a journal through that, which I felt was really cathartic and helped me navigate what was a pretty tough time because so much of my life I kind of down to a science of goal setting, like
Mm-hmm.
come up with it, you have a plan, you follow the steps, you get it done no matter what. Certain things in life, though, doesn't matter how great of a plan or how driven you are and how many actions you take, it just won't happen. And so that was one of those scenarios where I had to, like, it was life telling me, like, okay, you got to learn how to surrender and let it, it was really, really challenging, but there were so many gifts involved with the whole thing. Like, that was the tipping point for us deciding to move from San Jose, which is like big city, concrete, everything. Like it was great for careers, very fast paced and, achievement driven. But that was never where I wanted to be long term. I always wanted to live in the mountains. And when we first got pregnant and then we had the loss, that was kind of like, okay, like, what are we waiting for this dream to move? Like, let's shit or get off the pot. Because I think that with it not working out, we were able to pursue that dream and kind of look at like what's really keeping us here. Nothing. Like,
Mm.
yeah, we still have our friends and stuff, but to pull the trigger and make that decision, like there weren't any, like we could make it work if we wanted it badly enough. And that was one of those things that we could actually pull off. But I think if that pregnancy was viable, then we would have gotten comfortable because all of our friends, like we were late to the game. And so all of our friends already had kids. So we had our village kind of built in.
Yeah.
And I think we would have stayed. And so besides that, it also led me to learn the lesson of like surrendering and letting go. And I realized so much of my life, even though it has been focused on, making a plan and getting things done and enjoying progress and achievement and things like that, a lot of it came kind of like white knuckle controlling the process and the outcome. And I think that was also a big difference between home version of me versus travel
Mm.
me, is that at home I would just try to control and force everything to happen the way that I wanted to get what I wanted. And in the end result, it all worked out. But it's when I traveled, I just like I have an idea of what I hope to experience and see and do, but I left a ton of room for spontaneity and synchronicity in life to step in and give me just an incredible trip. I'm being open to that. And so when you're forced into surrendering and letting go, kind of wakes you up to like, hey, maybe life isn't meant to just be done my way. Maybe if I loosen the grip a little bit and see what's being presented to me and choosing to participate in it, whatever it may be, as much as I may not like it or love it, but instead just try my best to accept it as if it was given to me as a gift and show up as authentically as I can, try to make a positive impact just by showing up fully. And so it was a hard lesson to learn, but man, it was a game changer for me. And eventually, once I did ease up, like my grip on how I wanted things to be, it all kind of worked out even better than I had planned.
Yeah, because that sort of statement there is interesting because with travel, you can't really control too much of it anyway. Because you're in another country, another culture, you can try and control what you're going to see, and to an extent, you might go to a cafe for a coffee or something, right? But because you're not in a familiar land, there are going to be things that are going to happen that are just not on the radar. So I think travel kind of does teach you to be. I think I'm going to come to these in a minute, but you kind of listed some of your chapters with certain points that you need to be like focusing on, and one of those is openness or open-heartedness, if you like, because you need to be kind of open to change and accept that spontaneity is going to play a part. But at home, you can obviously go the other way and be really controlled, like you just said. I think maybe this is where I struggle as well, where travel, I've got no choice but to let things go and just kind of go with the flow, right?
Mm-hmm.
Don't know who I'm going to meet. I don't know what's going to happen today. I've got a rough idea, but then accepting that it might not go the way you planned, but that's fine. And accepting that as part of that day and not trying to control it too much.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly.
And I don't want to like list everything because people got to buy the book and read it, but I've got three sort of like, I guess they're part of your life story, but three ways to live. I've
Mhm.
picked three out in certain chapters. And the first one is open heart.
Mhm.
Be like have an open heart. I think we talked about that. Second one is authenticity. That's quite key, isn't it? I
Mhm.
think to give you an example, podcasting, you don't want to try and be someone else. You got to be yourself because then what's the point? I think you get kind of caught out in the end anyway. So I think like independent podcasters have this thing like we're authentic because it's just me and I'm not been paid to say this. I'm not been paid to say this. So yeah, that's quite key in life, isn't it? Being authentic, because once you start trying to come away from that, I don't think it goes down a good road. I don't think.
Mhm. Yeah, I completely agree. I think that people can tell when someone's being authentic and genuine, and
Mm,
we're naturally attracted to that because I think that's how we're meant to be.
yeah.
But I mean, just in the way that we're raised and needing to belong and fit in, we kind of lose that. And I think most of us have to unlearn it, unlearn the way that, like, who we've become, take away all the stuff that we've put on that's kind of hiding who we really are. And a lot of like really wonderful friendships, those are the people who have seen you like fully. And they're the ones who would like do anything for you. If you're not authentic, you can't achieve that same level of connection. And I really think that's what it's all about. It's like being courageous enough to show who you really are so that you can fully connect with other people. And it adds just a richness and depth to the human experience.
How did you find that with travel? Because you're going to meet so many different people and they are only going to know you for the first day to meet you, right? That's like, there's no previous history, there's no knowing you. So they literally know you from day one of, you're probably like 20 in your 20s or something, right? For a few days, maybe a week or even a few months if you're living in Argentina, whatever, or Ecuador. Like, how was that experience compared to home in terms of the friendships?
I think it's funny because like when like growing up, I've always been like super shy and I had have some really wonderful friendships, but it takes some time warming up, except for like the occasional few where just like you immediately click. But when I travel, it's kind of like I'd be effortlessly outgoing. And so that was very confusing to me because it felt like shyness it wasn't a choice. It was
Yeah.
just something that happened without me even knowing how to stop it. But I think the difference is at home, I'd be so focused on like, oh gosh, I hope I'm showing up okay. I hope they like me, like just getting all caught up in my head. And then when I traveled, I go into it really curious. Like, I want to know about you. Like, tell me your story.
Mm.
Like, I want to know everything and, be more open to talking to strangers, the non-creepy ones, of course,
Of course, yeah.
not the fake guides, everyone. But going into it and seeing the differences and listening to learn, not to agree or disagree or respond, but just like quality listening, like what you're doing with your podcast, and it helps you when you go into it with that mindset of curiosity and vulnerability, like showing up, maybe, making mistakes or blunders, especially if you're dealing in another language and just being like,
Mm.
I don't know, like not taking it so seriously. And then you're able to speed up, for me, the warm up time and go deeper quicker. I think that's it too, because you're in places for shorter periods of time. I don't know. It's easier to bypass the small talk and get right into the good stuff,
How do you deal with those like small periods of time where you meet a group of people or someone you get on really well,
Mm.
like almost at the time of your life, like, I don't know, 2 or 3 days, and then you both kind of saunter off into your own lives, whether you're carrying on traveling or going home, knowing the fact that you might not ever see them again.
Mhm.
Like, how do you deal with that?
Yeah, it felt like a long time ago. It definitely, there was much more of a finality to it because social media wasn't as prominent.
Yeah.
Now it's like it's cool. You can stay connected with people you meet, and part's really neat about social media.
Hmm.
Prior to that, or in the other circumstances where you don't end up connecting online or exchanging contact information, I don't know. I feel like you kind of have closure in it. You show up, you have this experience. I write about it in my journal and just think back really fondly of the different people that I've encountered. And
Yeah, it's
I'm okay with it. It's like a just acceptance, like, yeah, well, they're living there and I'm here and that's that.
there is kind of a beauty to it, isn't there?
Mm-hmm.
A little bit. It's quite tough sometimes, but I think there is a beauty to it where that is designed for that moment and that's it.
Mm-hmm. And sometimes it's the opposite. And like, let's say you're compelled to like, let's exchange emails or something. And there have been a handful of those relationships where they've circled back and, several years later, someone's traveled close by and you end up being able to meet up with them. And that's super cool too.
Yeah. I've done that a few times with people met traveling. Yeah,
Mhm.
in the last 10 years. It's been very interesting, isn't it? Yeah,
Mm.
yeah. Also, you mentioned my third point for your book is finding the funny. I think you mentioned that a few times. That's key as well, isn't it? Because you do need to kind of let loose a little bit sometimes and not take anything too seriously, because otherwise, what's the point?
Mhm.
There is a time and place, I guess, for being serious, but you even meet these people traveling, they're kind of a bit serious when they travel. You think, oh, you just need to let go a little bit. I think you mentioned being vulnerable. This podcast is definitely that, because some people I interview I know, and we have that connection already, but someone like you, for example, I don't know. So I met you
Mhm.
for the first time literally an hour ago. So there is like a different type of connection and vibe there, because I've got to get to know you in this like hour and a quarter that we're talking. But that
Yeah.
is different to someone I know, right? So you kind of need to be open minded, but also a bit vulnerable and kind of turn up for a bit of a laugh, really, because otherwise it can go the other way. So yeah, I think that's a key point as well.
Yeah, and I think like I don't know, so many of the mishaps that happen on travel, like during travels that might be really frustrating at home, like those are the things that you end up telling to your friends
Yeah,
and stories later. It's like that's the comic relief. And at the time it might not feel funny, but travel speeds up the amount of time it takes for you to laugh about some sort of mishap or setback or when you mess up on saying something. And the more that we can bring that back to daily life, the more enjoyable it'll be. And just like being able to laugh at yourself, it's contagious, and it just is kind of like, yeah, it doesn't have to be so serious. It's way more enjoyable when we can just kind of recognize that and laugh it off and see it all as a gift,
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. And which is your favorite chapter in the book?
Oh, that's tough. I think actually the first one, open-hearted, just
It's
that
strong.
what led me to make so many decisions. And that's been one of my main guiding compasses in life, is like, get out of my freaking head, get into my heart, and have that be the decision maker. It hasn't really steered me wrong. And it just is led to so many incredible friendships and adventures. And I would say that one.
Okay. That's good because people got to start there, right? So
Yeah, it all goes downhill from there.
I'm not saying that funny. Okay, we'll come back round to the book in a bit. I've got some questions about what type of traveler you are,
Hmm.
based on what you've talked about so far in your book, but also outside of the book. Are you a bit like me, like a budget backpacker, or are you sort of mid-range luxury? Do you prefer overland travel, or do you mind flying? Like, what type of traveler are you, do you think?
That's kind of shifted. For most of my travels, it was more budget to mid-range. I stay in hostels, but I do private room.
Hmm.
And that's mostly because I had like some horror stories from friends, and like where she woke up in the shared dorm with a guy licking her face. And I'm like, I'm cool off that. Like,
Fair.
I don't
Okay.
even like when cats do that to me, let alone random guys in the middle of the night. But usually, um, I would say for up. Okay, this is all like pre-kids. All right,
Yeah,
that's where things kind of shifted for me.
sure.
Pre-kids, it was more budget focused. Try to get much, like, I alternate between like slow travel and get as much in as I can.
Hmm.
So I kind of find a balance in that, and I like having home bases, but I also like seeing different cities. It changes, but I love going to places that are kind of off the beaten track that can really shock my senses. I would say pre-kids most recently, that was just before COVID. And that's when I had done the Nepal, India, and Myanmar trip.
Oh yeah.
And it was just everything I'd hoped for. Like we saw a lot of places, we met so many people, did a lot of hiking, and just went really far outside of our comfort zone, and it was amazing. So just kind of saying yes to whatever shows up. When we were in Myanmar, we were staying in this like guest house type thing in Inle Lake. So
Oh
this
yeah. In the
floating
lakes.
village.
Yeah.
And you had to take this little boat to get there. And on our last day, it was me and my friend Amber, and we were taking the boat back to go to the next city. And his wife, the boat driver's wife and son, were in the little boat with us. And they didn't speak English and we didn't speak Burmese, but they invited us to lunch at their house. And so we went. Like, it was just like, you know what? We have time. Sure, let's
Yeah.
go.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they ended up like getting a bunch of food and setting it up on the floor with a roll of toilet paper to use as a napkin. And it was like just this 2-room wooden house on stilts on the water.
Oh wow.
And they had 3 cats. And like for entertainment, it's like, how do you have a lunch with people who, when you don't speak the same
Yeah.
language,
Yeah.
that awkward? Like home Catherine would be just like flipping out. Like, what am I, what do I do? But Travel Cat was like, let's just see what happens. And so what happened was a lot of laughter and gestures and showing photos and videos. And then the husband had taught his cats how to do tricks. And so he was showing us these tricks where they jump through hoops. And it was an amazing lunch. And one of our most, like, for me, one of the best memories of the whole trip. And it just came from a random yes,
Mm.
And so that was the type of travel that I liked. And then I have now 2 boys, a 3-year-old and a 1-year-old. And so the travel has kind of shifted. The places that we go are a little bit different. Like we went to Canada with my first son and did Banff and Jasper and then Chile. And then we just got back a week and a half ago from Norway. And I, so places where what we learned is that we had a bit of a health scare when we were traveling once, and we're like, note to self, like, at least until they're like out of the really young baby stage, go to
Sure.
a place with decent healthcare just in case.
Yes. Yeah, yeah. Makes sense.
And also, like, transportation wise, like, how comfortable are we going to a place in South America where the car seats are hard to come by and we don't really want to travel with it? Like, so just taking those things into account. And then it's also like a slower pace because we don't want to be moving to different hostels, hotels, Airbnbs like every couple nights. So in the Norway trip, we were there a little over 2 weeks. We only did two cities in Norway and then Denmark on the way out because it was a direct flight back. Stopped at a lot of playgrounds, which I never would have done without it.
Yeah.
But it's kind of nice because although I do miss the more adventurous stuff, I know that'll come in the future or whenever they're a little bit older and I can start doing like solo trips or these kind of more adventurous ones with them. I do enjoy the slower pace, and it's cool because going to these like, local playgrounds, we do like see what we want to see, pop off at a playground and then hang out at a cafe, and you get to meet other local parents. And that was pretty cool. And just see the different ways that people parent, which is different everywhere you go. Just a little bit slower, kind of taking more like, okay, let's pretend we're locals here for a little bit. And if we don't get to see all the sites, that's okay. But it's different. And I'm not going to lie, the Norway trip, like there was one or two, maybe three moments where I said, I'm never traveling with kids again.
Oh,
I was very jet lagged. And then it happened on the way back too, when I was super jet lagged and we all got COVID. And so that was, it was in the midst of that. And I'm like, never again. And then we finally all got sleep and weren't sick anymore. And I was like, oh, where next? So it was short lived, luckily.
Yeah, that's a bit of a journey, right? From the 17-year-old in Paris.
Yeah. It's different. It's a different kind of adventure, but it's for me, like, I'm kind of obsessed with seeking out moments of awe. And I think that's one of the things that I love so much about travel is that it's really, really easy to do that because you're going to generally these amazing places that are, visited for a reason, and you're seeing extraordinary things. And so, of course, you're going to experience awe. And that's one of those things I really try to make an active effort to bring that back to daily life, because that makes me feel so alive and so connected to everyone and everything, every aspect of the environment around me fills me with wonder. So how can you do that when you have like the daily grind and everything's always kind of the same? How do you get that same feeling? And so I've been trying really hard to do that. And it's been kind of cool because like my kids show me how, like, hey, how about instead of overlooking the same tree that you walk past every day, we stop, we pick up the most fascinating rock in the world and look at the tree bark. And at first you're like, come on, we got to walk the dog and get exercise and this. And you just like pause for a second. You see their sense of awe and wonder, because for a lot of this, it is the first time.
I know. Yeah.
And so to make that effort to be like, whoa, pause. Let me just put on a different lens here and pretend like this is the first time. And it is absolutely incredible. And it's an active effort. But when I really try, I notice a difference. It's pervasive. It spreads to everything else in my life, and it kind of eases it up and reminds me like, gosh, it is all really magical if you look for it.
Yeah, that's a great point actually about that, because imagine being like one of those like most traveled people, right? Which I've interviewed a few on my podcast, and it's great they get to go to all these places, but then you don't want to run out of places to go to, do you? That'd be pretty sad way, because the three places you mentioned like in this conversation, like Chile, I'm like thinking, well, you could get a boat down the coast towards the Patagonia area. That'd be incredible getting a boat down there. Like I can't imagine the views there. Norway, I've never been to, unbelievably. So I can imagine it's fjords and it's like the roads go all the way through the islands. I think that'd be incredible. You mentioned Myanmar. We went to Bagan. That was incredible. And Yangon, bit of a crazy city.
Mm-hmm.
Like just these places do invoke awe because how can it not?
Mm-hmm.
So that is the draw, right? But yeah, you're right. Locally, it's like taking that different road or that different street
Mm-hmm.
and making yourself do that because otherwise, if you just do the same walk again, even if you like it, you do need to change it up a little bit just to keep things fresh.
I recently heard this podcast interview, and this woman was talking. This woman had cancer and like a recurrence of it, and she had first been diagnosed when she was like in her 20s, and then now
Oh
it's like
wow.
several years later after she went into remission, it came back, and
Mm,
was chatting with her doctor, and she was just like the way that it showed up is that she kind of has to be on chemo indefinitely. And she's like, I don't know how to do that without an end time. Like, and he was like, just live live each day like it's your last. And she was like, that is very stressful and confusing. Sell everything and don't plan
mm,
for the future. And that we've all heard that advice. Just live each day like it's your last. And it's always stressed me out too, because I was like, how do you do that? But then also take into account the future, because those are two
yes.
different things.
Yeah.
Those
Yeah. Yeah.
plan very differently. And she thought about it and she said, I think for me, the better option, the one that doesn't fill me with stress, but instead peace, is to live each day like it's my first. And that's how you experience
Mm,
awe for, the mundane and are able to see the extraordinary within the ordinary.
mm.
And I think that's one of the main keys for being able to, tap into that traveler's mindset no matter where you are.
Yeah. 100%. Definitely agree with that. Cool. Yeah, that's quite a interesting statement. That. Okay. And has there been one place that blew your mind,
Oh man, so many.
or even one area within a place?
One place that blew my mind, I would say, I think New Zealand. I went
Favorite.
there and did like a road trip for my honeymoon. And it has to be the most consistently beautiful place I've ever seen.
Mm.
It's like usually you go on a road trip. And we were there for like almost 4 weeks. 4 week road trip through like California. You pass by some armpits, like some places where just drive, keep going. Let's get to the good stuff. And in New Zealand, it was like, such diverse environments just every couple hours and stunningly beautiful nature. And the roads kind of are designed for enjoying it. So there's all
Yeah.
these little signs like this little hike and viewpoint like all along. So you'd stop. What we had to do is like once we got used to the view and stopped to kind of appreciate it, we'd be like, hike break. We need to get out of the car and get back because it was just like so stunning everywhere.
Yeah.
So that one really blew my mind nature wise, I'd say.
Yeah. We used to live there for a year. I think we do think
Oh,
about it
wow.
most days.
Well, where
Um,
did you live?
we lived in Wellington. That's the
Okay. Yeah.
because it's on the base of the North Island, but you can get a ferry across to the south, right? So it's quite a good
Yeah.
place to be.
We were there for, I think, just a couple days
Yeah.
before hopping over to the South Island.
Do love that city. Cool. Yeah. I think I shared a meme the other day about New Zealand about said something like most days we think or we tell people we're okay, but actually we're just thinking about getting a flight to New Zealand tomorrow. I think that's pretty true. I think as a place, incredible.
Yeah.
Kind of do miss it quite a lot. Yeah. Okay.
Time to go back.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's just a little bit. It's just bad timing, unfortunately, for us because we got permanent residency in Canada. But I think if we went to Canada first, then New Zealand, obviously it would have been New Zealand. And I
Yeah.
think, do I prefer it to Canada? Maybe I do. I don't know. Let's go with you mentioned culture shock before. Has there been anywhere where you maybe had high expectations but didn't quite hit the mark?
I don't think so, actually.
All right, that's a good place to be.
Nothing comes to mind anyway.
Okay, and got to come back round to Ecuador and Argentina because you lived there. What are some of like the key traits that you need to maybe like adapt to life in those countries or similar countries to those where it's different language maybe and a different way of doing things?
So Those two were very different. We'll start with Ecuador. I lived in a town called Loja, which is in the Andes Mountains. It's kind of close to Peru, but it's not one of the go-to spots that people visit.
Mhm.
And it's a university town, so even though it's small, it still felt a little bit bigger. Not a lot of people spoke English there. And so I would say, considering studying a year in Barcelona and then taking Spanish classes in high school and in college, truly where I learned Spanish is there in the several months that I lived there. Because it was like, if I want to talk, learn Spanish or
Yeah.
get really good at like gestures. And I didn't like, I'm really good at charades because of my travel experience. But I ended up renting a room from this older couple that were empty nesters, and I was hesitant to rent a room. I really wanted my own place because when I had done a homestay in France, I had two different host families, and it was not great experiences. Like I had to
Okay.
switch the first one, and so I was like, I don't want to do that. I just want to have my own place. But this is pre Airbnb, and like at the time,
Mm.
Google Maps hadn't mapped out Loja. Like so it was like,
Oh, wow.
yeah. And this was 2012. It was just kind of, it was right before everything really shifted in that aspect of travel.
Hmm.
And so I talked to this basically the whole reason I went there is I was talking with my aunt and I was saying I really, really want to go to South America and like learn Spanish and explore. And she's like, well, I work with someone whose cousin lives in Ecuador. Maybe I can connect you guys. And I was like, let's do it. And he happened to be the dean at this university. So we wrote each other and he's like, if you get down here, we can create like an internship or something for you at the university. And I'm
Wow.
like, all right, if you're serious, I'm coming. So through him, I was able to find this family who was willing to rent the room. And, think so. One of the hard things to adjust to, it was just changing my conditioning, and that is learning how to accept genuine hospitality. Like
Mm.
they were so kind and so welcoming. And I think like not all places are like this in the US and not all people are like this.
Hmm.
But for the most part, like the American culture generally, it's like we're not known to be like super, super hospitable like in like Latin cultures
Yeah.
and a lot of times my experience was like if someone offers you something or maybe offers help, it's kind of like they always remember it and almost expect something in
In
return.
return. Yeah.
And there's just that vibe. And when I was there, people would offer to help, and I'd be like, no, 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 no. And it was almost like insulting to them that I wouldn't accept their help. And then it took a while, but I finally started to, and it shifted something in me. And I got to see like how amazing it is when I offer someone something or some help or whatever. And I do it just for the intention of giving. It feels so good when people accept that, you know? And so that was a big shift for me to accept that that was a cultural thing. Like
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
many people and like the first day I moved into this couple's house, it was a Friday and they had weekly family meals where their kids and their grandkids came over for a Friday lunch. And I had just walked into my room and put down my luggage and they were like, through gestures and stuff, like, we're having lunch. Like, do you want to join? And I was like, oh, no, I don't want to interrupt. And they insisted. And then from then on out, I was invited to their family lunch every single
Wow.
week. And
Mm.
like we've stayed in contact. So that was just, that was very different. And so many people I met were just so eager to help and
And
be
then Argentina, I guess it must have the same sort of welcoming culture, right? Surely.
Yes, but it felt a bit like, have you been there before?
I have been to the north, yeah, Salta and Iguazu Falls. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So, um, in Buenos Aires, it is like a huge city,
Yeah.
and it does kind of have a bit of a European feel to it. And
Hmm.
that makes sense. So many people immigrated from Europe there. but it did feel a bit more like big cities. So like once you got to know people, yes, they'd be eager to help, but it wasn't as much like Ecuador, like please let me help
Sure.
you.
Yeah.
So it was a bit different. It definitely felt more fast paced. But again, met some really wonderful people there that I still stay in contact with.
Okay. And for these travels, as an extra question, not got in the notes. For these travels, how do you explain these to your friends at home? Like, how do you, or do you struggle with people maybe not being interested, actually, even knowing that much or asking many questions? How do you navigate that?
Yes, both.
Okay.
Depends on the people.
Yeah.
When I was younger, a lot of the travels, I'd noticed certain friends or whoever just would kind of be like, oh, like here we go again. Especially like also like the planning and the excitement of where I'm going
Yeah.
and then returning and telling people about it. But I don't know, like just a lot of those friendships faded. And
Oh,
now I'm surrounded by a lot of people who like just really amazing friends who we share our wins just as much as our struggles. And so my friends know that like this is what really lights me up. And so when you care about something, you want to hear about what lights them up. And right now people are eager to listen, and some places are hard to describe.
mm,
Some experiences is kind of like, I don't know, you have to be there, but you just do the best you can. And sometimes I can see that it's not really translating well. Um, but I love words. That's why I'm a writer. But unfortunately, like mom brain has ruined my brain for thinking of words. But I just like an example is I went to Cuba in 2017. It was right after Americans were able to go again, but you
yeah.
still had to get like special visas and permits to be able to go legally. And we were there for 10 days, and it was the first time since the internet became prominent in my life that I went for that length of time without it at all, because we did the people to people visa or permit, I forget what it was called. And so you stayed in these homestays while you were there, and very few places had internet except
Yeah.
for like a lot of these like really big hotels. And it was just a really wild experience. And I went with a friend, Amber. She was like my travel friend, the same one that I've mentioned before, and then two of her friends. And we noticed that like the first couple days we kept like pulling out our phones, like
Sure.
we're
Yeah.
feeling
Yeah.
notifications. And then once we got that out of our system, we just started to like, oh, it's like we could breathe easier. And we noticed so much. Like we were present without trying to be, and
Mm,
saw that so many of the people there, same thing, like you'd go into like a plaza or something and see just people sitting around on benches engaging with each other, or like if a guy was there by himself, he'd just be sitting there like looking around observing. And like nowadays and back then here where I live, it's like everyone, if there's any downtime, you're being productive or just looking on your phone.
yeah.
There it was like if there's downtime, you're looking around or talking to people. And to see that, it was just so refreshing. And you'd be like walking down the street, and it just felt like Cuba was like laughter and people talking and enjoying life. And then you'd walk past one of these like big hotels, and it almost felt like someone turned down the volume of Cuba, and like everything went cold because you just see people huddled up looking down at their screens because there was like Wi-Fi extending out.
Sure.
And
Yeah.
then you just like keep walking past, and you'd be like, wow, that's crazy. It's like
That's tough, isn't it? Yeah. Yeah.
their body's here, but their mind is in
Yeah.
another place. And so during that time, Fidel Castro actually passed away. Like we were there for a week, and then he passed away. And then like the remaining time, it was a much different experience because the country went into mourning. But we came back to the US, and it was like reverse culture shock. We walked through the airport, and like there was, all of the bars had TVs above it, and people were sitting at the bars with their laptops out, looking at their phones, and like the TVs had like news. It was like, felt like so much stuff, like trying to grab at your attention. And it was just such a weird feeling. And I just remember trying to describe the whole experience to friends, and it it was hard to put into words. They'd be like, "Oh my gosh, you were there when Fidel Castro passed away. What was that like?" And I was like, I don't know how to describe it because the whole experience was just so different.
And Cuba is an interesting country, isn't it, for Americans? Because obviously you hear, read or hear so much about it and the history. So I wonder if people in America have that preconceived idea about Cuba.
I think so, about so many places.
Oh, true. Yeah.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
especially Cuba. And I know like a lot has changed just in the few years that I've been.
Yeah. I think we're going in April. So that's
Oh, really?
our little
Cool.
trip in April. Yeah. And I do know because I've spoken to a Cuban American at a podcast event actually a few weeks ago. It's coming on the podcast and we talked for an hour, 45 minutes about Cuba, right? And it's
Oh,
just,
cool.
I can't wait to go because I think you're right. I'm actually fully expecting not to be on my phone, which is quite a nice relief because the internet is not really as available as what you think. Maybe it's more available now than when you went, but I
Mhm,
don't think it's still going to be easy, right?
mhm.
But I'm just looking forward to not having that to go off
Yeah,
grid and just really soak it in.
it's really nice. Do you
Yeah.
know which cities are you going to or
Well, we've
towns?
got 2 weeks, and obviously Havana's going to be one of them. So I'm not sure where to go after that for a week or 10 days. Still
Okay.
deciding.
If you remind me, like, off podcast, I could send you some of the places we went that we really loved.
Okay, yeah, that's great. Yeah, yeah, that'd be awesome. Okay, and I've got a few more questions left before we get to the quickfire travel questions to finish the
Yeah.
episode. I've got a point here about being creative because we're both creatives. You write a book. I'm actually writing a book, but also doing this podcast.
Oh, cool.
So, how do you keep creative in the modern day? Because obviously you've done your travels, you still go traveling, you've got kids. How do you keep that going? Because it's key, right? It's crucial. You need that, I guess, hour to escape just to write or podcast or whatever you do. So, how do you keep that going?
Well, James, that was like the perfect segue based on what we just talked about. It's what I've found is like creating that space for presence. Cuba forced that on me during those 10 days. And my mind was like just going nuts with all these observations and thoughts and curiosities and s- creating time for that. And it's really hard to do nowadays, especially like culturally, we don't make time for nothing, quote
Yeah, no,
unquote,
yeah,
for just being. We fill every space, at least like where I am in California, maybe not so much in South Lake Tahoe where I used to live. Absolutely. It's like you're not living unless you're productive. And to be productive, you need to be like listening to something or doing something, not just with your thoughts.
hmm
And like, what I noticed a while ago is like, I'd be like, and also there's so much great content out there, like podcasts and audiobooks and books and shows and like so much stuff like that I do want to, read or listen to. But what I noticed is that I would like take my dog. I have a golden retriever named Donut. I was taking him on a walk and like I'd pop in my headphones and listen to a podcast or an audiobook and it felt good because I was multitasking and learning but I realized that like throughout my day, working and just going through the routine, there's not a lot of time where I don't have any form of distraction. And distraction in
mm,
the sense of like even email or work or anything. I think maybe like the shower. I think
yeah,
about it. All of us even look at our phones when we're on the toilet. When else
yeah, I know.
when else is there time to just be with your thoughts? And like I was born in 1985, so I'm one of those people who kind of like first chunk of my life, no internet, second
Yeah,
chunk, yes. And
same
I
late
feel,
80s. Yeah, yeah,
yeah, I'm grateful for that
yeah.
because like as a kid, I hated being bored. Now
Crucial.
I really value it because boredom is the gateway to curiosity,
Mm,
wonder, and creativity. And so I started to try to some walks I would listen to stuff just because I enjoy it, it makes me happy and I like learning and listening to things. Other walks I started to, at least once a week, just no listening to anything. And so go with my dog and walk around. And I noticed in the very beginning when I started doing this, I was like, oh my gosh, like this is so boring. And then I'd have all these weird thoughts and I'd be like, this isn't like creative inspiration. Like these are just like, oh, I wonder what that is. Or like, but doing it enough, it opens the door. It creates a bit of space for you to not just think about, oh, what's next, or thinking about the past of how you could have done things differently or better, but instead like have a bit of time to think about what you can make. Like what's your
Mm,
heart calling you to make? And
yeah.
you have to schedule time for that nowadays. You can't just wait for it to happen.
Yeah. And I think for us, we're in that weird age where we do remember the tape days. You know, you might listen to music on tape and no internet and you just go outside because what you're going to do inside. So then switches really quickly, doesn't it? And goes
Mhm.
into this sort of social media smartphone era in quite a short space of time. But I think we both traveled in pre-smartphone times as well, which is a different type of travel, I find. Unless you're in somewhere like Cuba where it's kind of forced. But having no internet and no phone and no way of knowing where you're going, that
Mhm.
they're kind of some of the best stories really because you just
Oh
get
yeah,
lost.
exactly. I was gonna say I got lost all the time. I still get lost with you, but then I got especially lost. Always found again. Here I
Yeah,
am.
there you go. I tell you what's interesting for you is obviously your kids, right? How you're going to install those moments of boredom where they need that, right? They can't be fully stimulated all the time. For anyone who's got kids, I'd imagine, because I think you need boredom to appreciate those things that you said. But it's so easy, is it, just to probably give them an iPad or get them to watch TV. I don't
Yeah,
know. I don't know how you straddle that.
I saw, well, you know, luckily, like where I live, the community is very outdoorsy and
Ah,
active.
that's good.
So that plays a part, like peer group. But I saw this meme, so irony that I saw it like on Instagram,
Yeah,
but
of course. Yeah.
it was like is this little cartoon, and it had these two moms with their kids sitting on a bench, and one of the kids was just on an iPad, and the mom next to that kid was holding her phone, and she turned next to the mom who was reading a book with her kid reading a book, and she was like, how do you get your kid to read? And it's like the thing is, like, I just have to lead by example and create
Mm.
space for boredom too, because that's what they're going to see. If I'm
Yeah.
always on my phone,
Yeah.
always distracted, I'm the role model for these years, so I need to lead by example.
Yeah. I guess that's the only thing you can do. Okay. We're going to circle back round to your book and where we can find you. So, you have a newsletter, is that right?
Yeah,
Where can people sign up for that?
on my website, catmedina.com, and it's cat with a K. And yeah, I send out a newsletter once a month, and it's very short and sweet and just has 5 tips or things to think about to hopefully get you thinking about ways to feel more joy.
And then talking of joy, where can people find your book?
All the usual places, Amazon, Barnes and Noble, but I recommend trying to find it at your local independent bookstore or bookshop.org, which is the online way to purchase through indie bookstores.
Hmm.
And if your indie doesn't have it, you could just request it from them.
Okay. And talking of books, actually, do you have a recommendation? One fiction, one non-fiction, maybe that you like or are currently reading?
Let's see. Gosh, so many. Okay, so what comes to mind is the one that I just read is called The Women by Kristen Hanna. And it's historical fiction and written about the women who served in the Vietnam War as nurses and her experience during and after. And it was just one of those books where you finish it and you go, shit, now what am I going to read? That was so good.
Okay. It's called The Woman, right? Okay.
Yeah, by
Yeah.
Kristen Hanna. All of her stuff's great.
Yeah.
And then nonfiction, well, the one that I'm reading right now is called Good Inside, and it's a parenting book. And
Okay.
it's, you know what, even though it's a parenting book, it's a book about relationships. So
Oh, see.
I found it helpful to use regardless of whether it's like husband or family or with my kids.
Okay. And we can find you on your website. Do you have social media as well?
Yeah, on Instagram, I'm Kat Medina Writer, and that's Cat with a K.
Cool. I'll put that in the show notes so people can click on that. And my last question before the quickfire travel questions, what's coming up for 2025 or the rest of 2024 for travel?
So we just got back from the Norway and Denmark trip, and now is the exciting time where I get to plan.
Oh,
So Nothing is fully decided yet, but I feel like every other year I like to end up back in either South America or Central America. So we're going to give you continent.
Okay, fair
Yeah.
enough. Yeah, I'm off to Central America in November, so I'm going to El Salvador, which would be pretty cool.
See, that was really high on my list. Okay,
Oh, I can let you know how it goes.
please do. Yeah, I'd love to hear about it because I actually was just chatting with someone who's from there, and I was like, oh yes, I want to go there.
Yeah, I've got some local interviews actually lined up, so that's be quite interesting.
Oh,
I've got
cool.
some some free walking tour guides. Obviously, you tip them, not just free, but they've actually both agreed to come on the podcast, which is pretty cool. They both seem like different characters, so I'm keen to see what they're going to say about their country and where to see and what to travel and what not to do and stuff like that. So they
Oh,
should be
cool.
interesting.
Yeah, that'll be amazing.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. We're going to finish with some quick fire travel questions. These are normally some of your favorite things you've seen on your travels forever. So it could be from the early days to now. And I'm going to kick off with 3 favorite countries.
That is such a hard question.
Yeah.
Colombia, New Zealand,
Yeah.
and
Okay. Cool. You got some of mine in there. And what about 3 countries next on your hit list? You might have mentioned one already there. But...
yeah, well, let's see. Kenya, Mongolia, Pakistan.
Okay. And if you could move somewhere tomorrow for a year to live in a different country, where are you going to live?
Oh man, that's a really hard question. I want to live in so many different spots, struggling here. I kind of want to live in New Zealand for a bit, especially after talking to you about it.
Oh, got to, yeah. Okay. And are you a sunrise or sunset person?
Sunrise.
The first in a while. Good to hear it. Okay. And what about if you could sit anywhere in any place in the world with a cup of coffee and watch the world go by, where are you going to sit?
That is one of my favorite things to do when I travel, actually.
100%
Yeah,
agreed.
bring my journal, just
Yeah.
sit in a cafe. That is like my favorite activity.
El Salvador, I'll be sitting in San Salvador somewhere for 2 hours, probably reading and just watching the world. Can't wait.
Yes. Yeah, that is the best. Um, hmm. I really enjoyed doing that in Argentina because it was just like such great people watching. But then I also like there's something special about like the quintessential European cafes too,
hmm
like France or Spain, like Sevilla or something. I'm gonna give you a couple different answers then.
And do you have a favorite country for coffee? Like drinking it?
Guatemala, I think, actually.
Oh, that's part of my trip in November. Okay. What about if you could pick 3 favorite cuisines that you like worldwide?
Mexican food and Italian food and Ecuadorian food.
Oh, interesting. Not had that before. Okay. And what about somewhere that is the best place for budgeting? So where does a dollar go the furthest?
Hmm. I think from the places I've been, Bolivia and I like Myanmar also.
Ah, they're kind of 2 I'd say as well, actually. Myanmar is a crazy cheap. And what about a favorite landmark? Can be nature or man-made.
Let's see. I think this is just on my mind because of the recent trip, but fjords, like I first went to Milford Sound and I had never seen anything like that before. And then that's what kind of led to the idea of like, okay, where can I see more fjords? And so the Norway trip kind of came out of that. So I'm going to say the fjords
Fair enough.
in multiple countries.
This might be the same answer for the next question. What about 3 places where you love to do a road trip?
Canada, which I did and loved it.
hmm
And it's like I waited so long to go there because I just felt like I heard, oh, it's kind of like the US and it's so close to the US and it just didn't feel different enough.
hmm
But I've been 3 or 4 times now and I just love it.
Yeah.
It's so beautiful. So I would go back and do another road trip there for sure.
Okay. And the last question is going to be, what words of advice or wisdom can you give someone who's maybe a bit nervous about going to travel either locally or even internationally to a new culture?
I feel like curiosity and kindness can help remedy curiosity, kindness, and empathy can remedy any situation. And I feel like when you travel and you have that intention focused on those three things, like life kind of favors you and the right people will come into contact with you when needed if there's trouble or if there's just like some random adventure or something. I just feel like if you're open and you focus on those three things, you're going to be okay. And if you aren't, you're going to have a really amazing story.
Brilliant. Love it. Love that ending. Okay, Kat, thanks for coming on the podcast. Love hearing your stories. I think there's loads more to hear about for that, but a lot of them are in your book, The Joys of Jet Lag. So I'm going to look forward to getting through those, through this book. So it's amazing. I'll put this in the show notes so people can click and have a look. And thanks for making time. Appreciate you
Yeah.
coming on.
Thank you so much. It was a lot of fun.
Thank you. Cheers.